What happens when a grieving widow, armed with nothing but her love for her late husband, takes on a cunning lawyer and his manipulative client in an extraordinary fight for justice? This is a story of courage, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Brace yourself for an emotional journey filled with heartbreak, betrayal, and triumph as one woman refuses to let greed destroy her husband's legacy. Will her determination be enough to uncover the truth? Stay tuned to find out. Meet Emma Clark, a devoted wife whose world is turned upside down after the sudden loss of her husband, James. Just when she thinks life couldn't get harder, James's estranged brother, Michael, files a legal claim against her, contesting James's will. Michael insists the family estate, worth millions, belongs to him. Desperate to win, Michael enlists Victor Barnes, a ruthless and sharp-tongued attorney known for destroying anyone who stands in his way. For Emma, who has never been involved in legal battles, this marks the beginning of an uphill fight she never asked for. Stay tuned to see how Emma defies all odds, uncovers shocking truths, and takes on the most powerful forces to defend her late husband's memory. You won't believe the lengths people will go to for greed or the strength of someone who fights for love and justice. Emma Clark and her husband, James, shared a life of quiet happiness in the peaceful suburbs of Denver. Every morning began with coffee on their porch. Every evening ended with laughter in their cozy home. And every moment in between was filled with dreams of the future they were building together. James worked as an engineer, while Emma volunteered at the local library. They weren't wealthy, but they had each other, and that was more than enough. Their world came crashing down on a rainy night when James was tragically killed in a car accident. The sudden loss left Emma devastated. She struggled to adjust to life without him, leaning on their memories to navigate her grief. For months, she lived in a haze, her once lively home now filled with silence. Just as Emma began to find her footing, a new challenge emerged that would test her in ways she never imagined. James's estranged brother, Michael, who hadn't been in their lives for years, suddenly appeared with shocking news. He was contesting James's will. Michael claimed that James had promised him the family estate, a sprawling property worth millions. Emma was blindsided. James had made it clear in his will, which was signed and notarized, that everything should go to her. Yet Michael insisted the document was forged, adding to her distress. Michael had hired Victor Barnes, a lawyer with a reputation for winning cases at any cost. Emma's initial instinct was to avoid confrontation. She had no legal experience, no understanding of inheritance disputes, and no desire to fight. Her friends encouraged her to settle, arguing that it wasn't worth the stress. But something inside Emma refused to give up. She knew James loved her and wouldn't have betrayed her like this. Uncertain but resolute, Emma decided to face the storm head-on, determined to protect the life she and James had built together, even if it meant standing alone against greed and deceit. When Michael decided to contest James's will, he didn't just rely on his claims, he brought in the big guns. He hired Victor Barnes, a ruthless attorney notorious for his cutthroat tactics and unrelenting drive to win at all costs. Barnes had a reputation for tearing apart witnesses, bending the truth, and exploiting every legal loophole to his advantage. For Emma, walking into the courtroom and facing Barnes for the first time was an intimidating experience. With his designer suit, icy gaze, and sharp tongue, Barnes exuded an air of dominance that made even seasoned lawyers uneasy. Emma, on the other hand, was a novice in the legal world. And Barnes wasted no time in using that to his advantage. From the moment the trial began, Barnes launched an all-out assault on Emma's credibility. During his cross-examination, he sneered, "Mrs. Clark, do you even understand how inheritance law works? Or are you relying on sympathy to win this case?" The courtroom was silent. Every eye fixed on Emma as Barnes continued his verbal barrage, mocking her lack of legal knowledge and painting her as someone desperately clinging to what didn't belong to her. Barnes didn't stop there. He repeatedly questioned her motives, twisting her words to make her appear manipulative and self-serving. He insinuated that her decision to fight the case was nothing more than a ploy to steal the estate from Michael, the rightful heir. For Emma, every word was a dagger. Doubts began to creep into her mind. What if she wasn't strong enough? What if Barnes managed to convince the court? What if she lost everything? But as the trial dragged on, something began to change. Barnes's relentless attacks no longer filled her with fear, they ignited a fire within her. Each insult and condescending remark only strengthened her resolve. She remembered James's love, his trust in her, and the life they had built together. She realized she wasn't just fighting for the estate, she was fighting for James's honor and the truth. Despite the mounting pressure, Emma refused to back down. Barnes may have been a master of manipulation, but Emma's determination was rooted in something he couldn't touch: love, loyalty, and the undeniable truth. With every passing day, her quiet resolve grew stronger, preparing her for the battles ahead. The turning point in Emma Clark's fight for justice came one stormy night. Alone in her living room, she stared at James's old leather briefcase, which had been sitting untouched in the corner since his passing. It was a painful reminder of the man she had lost. But something compelled her to open it. Perhaps it was desperation. Or maybe it was James's unspoken encouragement guiding her in that moment. Emma's hands trembled as she opened the briefcase, her heart heavy with the weight of memories. She found blueprints, old photographs, and technical documents, each one a piece of James's life. A life now gone. As she sifted through the contents, tears welled in her eyes. Every page a bittersweet reminder of the man she loved. As she reached the bottom, her fingers brushed against something unexpected, a hidden compartment. Her heart pounded as she opened the concealed pocket and found a yellowed envelope. On the front, written in James's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "For Emma. In case something happens to me." Tears welled in Emma's eyes as she carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter addressed to her. James's words, filled with love and reassurance, leapt off the page. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. I've always worried that my brother Michael might try to take what doesn't belong to him. In this briefcase, you'll find the proof you need to protect what's ours. I trust you. Emma. Stay strong. And never doubt that you're doing the right thing. Always yours, James." Emma clutched the letter to her chest, overwhelmed by a mix of grief and gratitude. Alongside the letter were documents detailing Michael's financial schemes, debts James had covered, agreements Michael had denied, and correspondence that exposed his true intentions to claim the family estate through manipulation. James had anticipated everything. He had prepared for this battle long before Emma even knew it would happen. With renewed determination, Emma realized she couldn't let James's efforts be in vain. She needed help to present this evidence in court. And there was only one person she could think of, Tom Jenkins, a retired lawyer who volunteered at the local library where she used to work. The next day, Emma met with Tom, her nerves palpable as she laid out the contents of the briefcase. Tom, a kind and meticulous man in his 60s, examined the documents with a keen eye. His brow furrowed as he pieced together the story. "This is strong evidence," Tom said, finally looking up. "It paints a clear picture of what Michael was doing and proves James was trying to protect you. But presenting this in court won't be easy." Emma nodded, her resolve unwavering. "I'll do whatever it takes, Mr. Jenkins. I won't let James's legacy be tarnished." Tom gave her an encouraging smile. "Good. But you need to be prepared. Victor Barnes is ruthless. He'll attack your character, discredit your evidence, and twist everything to favor Michael. You'll need to stay strong, no matter how hard it gets." Emma took a deep breath, her hands tightening around James's letter. "I'll be ready. I have to be for James." Over the following days, Emma worked tirelessly with Tom to organize the documents and prepare for court. Tom walked her through potential scenarios, helping her anticipate Barnes's aggressive tactics. With each session, Emma's confidence grew. The weight of James's words and the strength of their love became her armor, shielding her from fear and self-doubt. When the court date arrived, Emma stepped into the courtroom with a sense of purpose. She wasn't just fighting for the estate, she was fighting for the truth. For James. And for everything they had built together. The first day of the trial was marked by a tension so thick it seemed to hang in the air of the courtroom. Emma Clark sat at the plaintiff's table, clutching James's letter in her lap for strength. Across the room, Victor Barnes stood tall and imposing, his piercing gaze fixed on her like a predator studying its prey. Michael Harper, with a smug expression, sat beside Barnes, exuding an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. The proceedings began with opening statements. Barnes wasted no time painting Emma as a desperate widow clinging to an estate that didn't belong to her. His words were sharp, calculated, and meant to plant doubt in the minds of the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," Barnes began, pacing before the jury, "this case isn't about love or loss, it's about greed. Mrs. Clark has fabricated a story to disinherit the rightful heir, my client Michael Harper, from what was promised to him. This is an attempt to manipulate the law. And we won't stand for it." Emma swallowed hard. But she kept her composure. She knew Barnes would try to twist the narrative. But she also knew the truth was on her side. When it was Tom Jenkins's turn to present Emma's case, he spoke with quiet confidence, appealing to the jury's sense of fairness. "This is a story of love, trust, and betrayal. James Clark entrusted everything to his wife, Emma, because he knew her character and her devotion to him. The evidence we will present proves beyond doubt that Michael Harper's claims are baseless and that the truth cannot be buried, no matter how hard they try." The first round of questioning began, and Barnes wasted no time attacking Emma on the stand. "Mrs. Clark," Barnes said, his voice dripping with condescension, "you claim to have been completely unaware of your husband's financial dealings before his passing. Is that correct?" "Yes," Emma replied firmly. Barnes smirked. So, are we to believe that you, a woman with no legal experience, somehow stumbled upon this so-called evidence? Doesn't that seem a bit convenient? Emma met his gaze. It's not convenient, Mr. Barnes. It's the truth. My husband left it for me because he trusted me to protect his legacy. Barnes's eyes narrowed. And this letter you claim he wrote it conveniently appears just in time to bolster your case. How do we know it wasn't fabricated? Tom immediately objected. Your Honor, Mr. Barnes is badgering the witness and attempting to discredit evidence that hasn't even been introduced yet. The judge nodded. Sustained. Mr. Barnes, you will have the opportunity to challenge the evidence when it's presented. Move on. Barnes retreated momentarily. But his questions grew sharper as he pressed Emma on her motivations, her actions after James's death, and her handling of the estate. Emma, however, remained composed, answering each question calmly and clearly. She refused to let him rattle her, even as he tried to paint her as a scheming widow. When it was Tom's turn, he guided Emma through her testimony with care. She recounted how she had discovered the hidden letter and documents, emphasizing James's foresight and love for her. The jury listened intently. And for the first time, a shift in the room's energy was palpable. The moment of truth came when Tom introduced the letter and the initial documents from James's briefcase. Your Honor, Tom said, holding up the letter. This is a handwritten note from James Clark to his wife, Emma, detailing his concerns about Michael Harper's intentions. Along with this letter, we have supporting documentation that exposes Michael Harper's financial schemes and proves his attempts to claim what does not belong to him. The courtroom fell silent as the letter was passed to the judge. He adjusted his glasses and read it carefully, his expression unreadable. Barnes immediately rose to object. Your Honor, I move to have this so-called evidence dismissed. There is no way to verify its authenticity, and it is clearly an attempt to sway the jury with emotional manipulation. Tom countered swiftly. Your Honor, the letter and accompanying documents have been reviewed by forensic experts who verified their authenticity. We have the reports to submit into the record. The judge considered for a moment before responding. The court will accept this evidence into the record. Mr. Barnes, you will have the opportunity to challenge its credibility during cross-examination. Barnes's face darkened, and Michael's smug demeanor faltered. Across the room, Emma felt a surge of relief. The judge's ruling was a small victory, but an important one. As the documents were presented, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. The jury leaned forward, eager to see the evidence that painted a damning picture of Michael Harper's actions. Tom walked the court through each document, carefully explaining their significance. Bank records showed payments James had made to cover Michael's debts. Correspondence revealed Michael's repeated requests for money and his attempts to rewrite their financial history. Barnes tried to object at every turn, but his usual confidence seemed to waver. The weight of the evidence was undeniable, and the cracks in his defense were beginning to show. By the end of the day, Michael looked visibly shaken. He whispered furiously to Barnes, who nodded tersely, his jaw tight. As Emma left the courtroom that evening, she felt a flicker of hope. For the first time, it seemed that the truth was beginning to emerge. But she knew the fight was far from over. Barnes and Michael wouldn't give up easily. And the days ahead would be just as challenging. Still, as she clutched James's letter in her hand, Emma reminded herself of his words, "Stay strong. And never doubt that you're doing the right thing." Emma returned home after a grueling day in court. Exhausted but hopeful. The judge had accepted James's letter and documents into evidence. And for the first time, it felt like the truth was starting to surface. But as she approached her front door, she noticed something was off. The door was slightly ajar, and the lock was scratched as if someone had forced their way in. Her pulse quickened as she pushed the door open, revealing the chaos inside. Drawers were pulled out and emptied onto the floor. Papers, books, and belongings were scattered everywhere. Her stomach dropped as she ran to the closet where she had hidden James's briefcase. The spot was empty. Panic and fear gripped her. The briefcase, James's letter and documents, it was all gone. She stumbled backward, trying to process what had happened. Whoever had broken in hadn't come for valuables or jewelry, they had come for the evidence. Emma called the police, who arrived shortly after to take her statement. As the officers dusted for fingerprints and examined the scene, one of them, a young woman with kind eyes, placed a reassuring hand on Emma's shoulder. "Whoever did this knew exactly what they were looking for," she said. "We'll do everything we can to find them. But I suggest staying somewhere else for now. This doesn't feel random." Emma nodded, her mind racing. Her fear was palpable, but beneath it was a simmering anger. They were trying to intimidate her, to make her give up. She wouldn't let them. She couldn't let them. Desperate for answers, Emma turned to Tom Jenkins. She explained what had happened, her voice trembling with emotion. Tom listened intently, his expression growing more serious with every word. "This changes things," Tom said. "If they've gone this far, they're running scared. But we can't lose hope. James was meticulous. If he left one set of documents, there's a good chance he created backups." Emma frowned. "Do you think he might have hidden them somewhere else?" Tom nodded thoughtfully. "If there's one place James would have kept something safe, it's in his workshop." That evening, they drove to Emma's house together. The police had cleared the scene, but the disarray still left Emma uneasy. Tom followed her to the garage, where James's workshop remained untouched, filled with tools and unfinished projects. Emma hesitated at the doorway, memories of James flooding her mind. This was his space, where he spent hours tinkering and building. She ran her fingers over the workbench, feeling a bittersweet connection to him. "Let's start looking," Tom said gently. They searched methodically, opening drawers, examining shelves, and checking every nook and cranny. Time seemed to stretch on with no sign of anything significant. Emma's hope began to waver until she noticed something unusual: a small, locked cabinet built into the wall, nearly hidden behind a stack of boxes. "Tom," she called, her voice trembling. "I think I found something." Tom hurried over and examined the cabinet. It was sturdy, the lock well-worn but intact. "Do you have a key?" he asked. Emma thought for a moment, then grabbed James's toolbox. She rifled through it, her hands shaking, until she found a small key tucked away in the corner. It fit perfectly. The lock clicked open, and Emma pulled the cabinet door wide. Inside was an envelope, thick with papers, and a small notebook in James's handwriting. Emma's breath caught as she carefully pulled them out. Tom flipped through the documents, his eyes widening. "This is it," he said. "These are backup copies of everything: bank records, agreements, even more details about Michael's schemes. James must have known this day might come." Emma clutched the notebook, tears streaming down her face. "He didn't just protect me. He made sure they couldn't destroy the truth." The next morning, Emma and Tom arrived at the courthouse with the newly found evidence. This time, they were prepared for whatever Barnes and Michael might throw at them. As Emma walked into the courtroom, James's letter in her pocket and the backup documents in her hands, she felt an unshakable determination. The break-in had shaken her, but it had also reignited her resolve. No matter how far her opponents were willing to go, she wouldn't stop fighting for the truth. James had trusted her to see this through, and she wouldn't let him down. As the trial wore on, it became clear that Calvin Harper and Victor Barnes were growing desperate. The weight of the evidence Emma and Tom had presented was steadily unraveling their case, and the jury's attention was shifting toward the undeniable truth. But Calvin and Barnes weren't ready to admit defeat. On the fourth day of the trial, Barnes stood before the court with a smug smile and announced, "Your Honor, the defense has obtained new evidence: a revised will, signed by James Clark shortly before his death, leaving the estate to my client, Calvin Harper." The courtroom erupted in gasps. Emma's heart sank as Barnes held up a document that looked suspiciously official. "This will," Barnes continued, "supersedes any previous documents and proves beyond doubt that my client is the rightful heir to the Clark estate." Tom immediately stood to object. "Your Honor, this so-called revised will has not been disclosed during discovery, and its sudden appearance raises serious questions about its authenticity." The judge frowned, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Barnes. "Mr. Barnes, why was this evidence not submitted earlier?" Barnes smoothed his tie, his confidence unshaken. "Your Honor, the document only recently came into our possession. It took time to verify its origins before presenting it to the court." The judge hesitated but ultimately ruled, "The document will be admitted into evidence, but the court expects a thorough examination of its authenticity." Emma felt a surge of anger and frustration as she watched Barnes hand the document to the clerk. Calvin sat beside him, his smug expression now one of triumph. During the recess, Tom reviewed the new will with a forensic expert they had brought in for the trial, Dr. Evelyn Marks, a seasoned professional known for her meticulous work in identifying forgeries. "It's a clever forgery," Dr. Marks said as she examined the document under a magnifying glass. "But not clever enough. The ink, paper, and signature all have subtle inconsistencies. This wasn't written or signed by James Clark." Tom nodded grimly. "Can you testify to that in court?" "Absolutely," she said. When court reconvened, Tom called Dr. Marks to the stand. She carefully walked the jury through the evidence, pointing out the inconsistencies. Using a projector, she displayed a side-by-side comparison of the forged signature and verified examples of James's handwriting. "This signature," Dr. Marks explained, "was likely traced or manipulated digitally. Additionally, The paper and ink used are not consistent with the materials James typically used for official documents. This will is a forgery. Barnes immediately jumped to his feet. Objection. Your Honor. This testimony is purely speculative. The judge shook his head. Overruled. Dr. Marks is an expert witness, and her findings are based on thorough analysis. Mr. Barnes, you will have the opportunity to cross-examine. Barnes attempted to discredit Dr. Marks during cross-examination, but she remained calm and professional, countering every question with precision and clarity. Each answer further exposed the forgery for what it was. The courtroom buzzed as Tom followed up by calling additional witnesses, including James's close friend, Mark Reynolds, who testified about conversations he'd had with James. James was adamant about his will. Mark said he wanted Emma to have everything. He told me himself that he didn't trust Calvin and was worried he'd try something like this. With every piece of testimony, Calvin's demeanor became more erratic. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, whispered angrily to Barnes, and at one point, slammed his hand on the table, drawing stares from the jury. The final blow came when Tom presented an email exchange between Calvin and a known document forger, found during an investigation led by Officer Burke. The emails detailed Calvin's request for a convincing replacement for James's will. When confronted with the evidence, Calvin exploded. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, standing abruptly. "You're all against me. This whole thing is a setup." The judge banged his gavel. "Mr. Harper, control yourself, or I'll hold you in contempt." As Calvin slumped back into his chair, Barnes struggled to maintain his composure. The jury, however, was already beginning to see through their desperate tactics. By the end of the day, Calvin's erratic behavior and Barnes's faltering composure told the story the jury needed to hear. The forged will, intended as a last-ditch effort to save their case, had instead sealed their fate. For Emma, it was a vindication of everything she had fought for. James's true intentions had been upheld, and the truth was emerging stronger than ever. The end of the battle was in sight, but she remained vigilant, knowing Calvin and Barnes weren't above trying one last desperate move. The trial reached its boiling point when Officer Burke, who had been quietly investigating the case's darker twists, finally delivered the breakthrough Emma and Tom needed. Late one evening, Burke called Tom with urgent news: Calvin's hired enforcer, the man responsible for breaking into Emma's home and setting her car on fire, had been apprehended. "He's confessed," Burke said over the phone. "Not only to the break-in and arson but also to being hired by Calvin Harper. We have emails, payment records, and surveillance footage tying them together." This revelation was the nail in the coffin. Calvin's direct involvement in criminal acts left no room for plausible deniability. The next morning, Tom introduced this new evidence in court, presenting the jury with a clear picture of Calvin's deceit. Payment records showed Calvin had wired money to the enforcer days before the break-in. The emails revealed Calvin's explicit instructions to recover important documents from Emma's home and destroy any other evidence of James's intentions. Victor Barnes tried to counter the evidence, rising to his feet with one final attempt to discredit the new findings. "Your Honor, this evidence is circumstantial at best. There's no direct proof linking my client to these crimes." But the judge, having heard enough, wasn't swayed. "Mr. Barnes," he said sternly, "the evidence is overwhelming. The court will not entertain baseless objections." Barnes's carefully crafted composure cracked, and he sat down, visibly defeated. Calvin, on the other hand, looked like a man cornered. His face flushed with anger, and his hands gripped the edge of the table as if holding on for dear life. With calm determination, Tom delivered his closing argument. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case isn't just about inheritance, it's about integrity, love, and the length some will go to distort the truth for personal gain. But Emma Clark has stood strong, honoring her husband's wishes and proving that no amount of greed can bury the truth. James Clark trusted his wife, Emma, to honor his wishes. And the evidence proves beyond doubt that Calvin's actions were driven by greed, not justice." The jury deliberated for several hours. But to Emma, it felt like an eternity. She sat in silence, clutching James's letter, her heart pounding with anticipation. Finally, the jury returned, and the foreperson stood to deliver the verdict. The room fell silent as she spoke. "We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Emma Clark." The courtroom erupted in applause, a wave of relief washing over Emma as tears streamed down her face. Tom placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his own smile one of quiet triumph. Across the room, Calvin's face turned pale, and he slumped in his chair, defeated. The judge's ruling was decisive. Not only was the estate officially awarded to Emma, but Calvin was also charged with forgery, conspiracy, and arson. Victor Barnes, his reputation irreparably tarnished, faced disciplinary action from the Bar Association for his unethical conduct. As the courtroom emptied, Emma stood for a moment, soaking in the weight of what she had achieved. She had fought for James's honor and won. In the weeks that followed, Emma worked with Tom to finalize the legal proceedings. Calvin's charges moved forward swiftly, and he faced significant legal penalties. Meanwhile, Barnes's career crumbled under the weight of the scandal. On a quiet evening, Emma stood in her garden, holding James's letter in her hands. The stars above shimmered brightly, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves around her. She closed her eyes, feeling a deep sense of peace she hadn't known in months. "Thank you, James," she whispered, her voice soft but steady, "for trusting me, for giving me the strength to fight. We did it." For the first time since his passing, Emma felt as though James was truly at rest, his love and legacy protected, and the truth finally revealed. The battle for justice had been long and grueling. But as Emma Clark stood in her garden on a quiet evening, she felt a peace she hadn't known in months. The air was crisp, and the scent of blooming flowers surrounded her, a reminder of the life she and James had built together. In her hands, she held the letter James had written, his words still etched in her heart. She read it again, her fingers brushing the familiar paper, as if it carried his presence, his love, his trust, and his unwavering faith in her had guided her through the darkest days of her life. Emma knelt by the small rose bush she and James had planted together, its blossoms now vibrant and full. "We did it, James," she whispered, her voice steady but soft. The truth came out. And they couldn't take away what you left behind. I hope you're proud. As she stood, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. And for a fleeting moment, Emma felt as though James was with her watching, smiling, and at peace. Looking back on her journey, Emma thought of the trials she had endured, the loss, the intimidation, and the relentless fight to uphold what was right. But through it all, she had found a strength she didn't know she possessed. In the end, it wasn't about the estate or the courtroom victories, it was about love, honor, and the courage to stand for the truth. Emma turned to the camera, her voice calm but resolute. In the end, truth and love prevailed. This journey taught me that justice is always worth fighting for, no matter how difficult it seems. And for that, I will always be grateful.